You've probably heard this story before. It's a grisly one. It goes something like this. The medieval church declared a war on cats, and because of that, Europe was defenseless when the Black Death hit. It's a wild tale, right? It seems to explain one of the biggest disasters in human history with one single, kinda dumb mistake. Well, today we're going to put that story under the microscope and see if it holds up. So let's get right into it. The myth is pretty straightforward. A pope, sometime in the Middle Ages, declared that cats were demonic. This supposedly led to a massive, continent-wide cat massacre. So when the plague arrived on ships carried by rats, there were no cats left to hunt them, and boom, the Black Death. It's a very neat cause and effect story. But the real question is any of it actually true?
You know, to really get why this myth has such a strong grip, you have to understand just how terrifying the Black Death was. We're talking about a period between 1347 and 1351. People called it the Great Mortality. You could literally be fine in the morning and dead by sundown. It was absolutely devastating, wiping out somewhere between 30 and 50% of the entire population of Europe. Imagine that.
Okay, so let's start by breaking down the pieces of this, well, killer story. Why did people feel the need to come up with this explanation, and what's the supposed evidence at the heart of it all?
Let's just start with this number, 25 million. That's the low-end estimate for how many people died in Europe alone. When you're dealing with a catastrophe on that scale, it's just human nature to search for a simple reason why. You want someone or something to blame. And a story about accidentally killing your own saviors? Well, that's just perfectly tragic and ironic, isn't it?
Now, the people who push this myth, they don't just wave their hands and say it happened. They actually point to a specific historical document. They claim it's the smoking gun, a papal bull that they say kicked this whole cat-astrophe off.
And here it is. It's a document called Vox in Rama, from the year 1233. But right away, we hit the first huge crack in the story. See, this wasn't some worldwide declaration. It was a letter sent to just a handful of leaders in Germany. And its whole point wasn't to talk about cats in general. It was to describe the really bizarre initiation rites of one very specific, very local heretical group.
And when you actually read it, it gets even weirder. The letter describes this strange vision where a giant black cat comes to life and the cult members, well, they kiss its butt. I mean, this isn't a condemnation of all cats or even all black cats. It's zeroed in on one weird, magical cat and one supposed ritual.
So let's just lay it all out. Vox in Rama talks about one single weird cat vision. It doesn't say all cats are bad. It definitely does not contain any order to kill cats. It was only sent to a few guys in Germany. And this is the big one. It was written in 1233. That's more than 100 years before the Black Death even showed up in Europe. This document just can't be the cause.
All right, so if the church wasn't ordering some great cat purges, what did medieval people actually think about them? How were cats really viewed back then?
The myth paints this picture of Europe being totally gripped by a fear of cats. But the reality? It's pretty much the opposite. When you look at the historical record, it shows that most people in the Middle Ages saw cats as really useful, valuable animals. And yeah, sometimes even as beloved pets.
I mean, check out this quote. It's from a 13th century guide written for women who chose to live as religious hermits. It says a cat was the only animal they were allowed to have. Why? Because a cat was seen as a quiet, self-sufficient companion that wouldn't get in the way of a life of prayer. It's the exact opposite of being forbidden.
And that wasn't just a one-off thing. The evidence is all over the place. Cats were kept in monasteries, convents, and regular homes for a very simple reason. They were fantastic at catching mice and rats. You even see etiquette guides from the time mentioning that you should probably shoo the cat out of the dining room before a fancy meal. There was even a Welsh law that put a specific price on a cat once it proved it was a good mouser. They were just a normal, valued part of life.
Okay, so the whole cat massacre thing, the historical evidence just isn't there. But let's play devil's advocate for a second. Let's just pretend it did happen. Would killing all the cats have actually made the plague worse? The logic of the myth seems so simple, right? Step 1, you kill the cats. Step 2, the rat population explodes. Step 3, the plague spreads like wildfire. It makes a certain kind of simple sense, but the actual biology of the plague, it's way more complicated than that.
So here's the first big biological problem with this story. According to the CDC, cats are actually really susceptible to catching the plague themselves. So if a cat kills and eats an infected rat, it can easily get the disease. And then its fleas could jump to a person. So in that scenario, the cat isn't a savior, it's another potential carrier of the plague.
And it gets even more complex from there. For a very long time, we all just accepted the simple version of the story. Rats had plague fleas, and those fleas bit humans. But a lot of modern research is actually challenging that idea, suggesting the story of how the plague spread is a lot more human.
A lot of scientists now think the Black Death just spread way too fast to be explained by rats alone. So, a newer theory suggests that the main way it spread wasn't from rat fleas to people, but from person to person, through human parasites, fleas and lice living in people's clothes and bedding. Now, if that's true, the number of rats, and by extension the number of cats, would have played a much smaller role than the myth wants us to believe.
So, let's recap. The Pope didn't order it, medieval people actually liked cats, and the science doesn't really back it up. Which leads us to the final and most important question. If this story isn't from the Middle Ages, where in the world did it come from?
Well, this timeline tells the real story. You've got Vox and Rama in 1233, the Black Death arrives in 1347, and then centuries of silence. Nothing. The theory really gets its start in 1999, in a book called Classical Cats. The author connected the dots between that old papal letter and the plague, but it was an assumption, not based on direct evidence. And from there, in the early days of the internet, the story just went viral.
And when you ask historians who've actually looked into this, they're all pretty clear. As the historian Mike Dash told the fact-checking site Snopes, the story is, quote, almost certainly a modern internet-based fabrication. It's not medieval history. It's modern folklore that we've just projected onto the past.
This whole thing is a great reminder that a really good story isn't always good history. The myth about the Pope and the cats and the plague is still around because it's simple, it's dramatic, and it just feels like it could be true. Which really makes you wonder, right? What other historical facts that we see floating around online are just compelling stories, waiting for their own explainer?